100.4 FM, and we are in the second hour. The exchange now on as we get into the second part of a very important conversation around land administration in Zimbabwe. We touch on a different aspect of that same conversation tonight, and my guest this evening, Chabang Ngobani, Head of Programs for Transparency International Zimbabwe, Shingirai Mushamba, Chief Director for Spatial Planning in the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works, and Mr. Ruben Akili, Programs Officer for the Combined Harare Residents Association, or CRA for short. Now, this is the second part of a program that is sponsored by Transparency International Zimbabwe, with the main aim of building accountability around land administration and, of course, shedding light on some of the issues that you're facing as residents and citizens here in Harare. Now we get in Harare and, of course, in Zimbabwe in general. Now we get into that conversation now, and I do invite you to be part of the same on 0719 100 404. You can also send us messages on Facebook. We are live on our Facebook page at Capital FM, and we do encourage you to be part of this very, very important conversation.
The Exchange on Deep Dive.
Now, welcoming my guests in studio, allow me to welcome the gentlemen who are here and are joining us in this very important discussion. Starting off with you, Mr. Akili Manirakanaka, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Thank you so much. We are also joined by Chabang Ngobani, Head of Programs for TIZ. Good evening, Chabang, and thanks for joining us once more.
Good evening, and thank you very much.
And Mr. Shingirai Mushamba. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program.
Wonderful. Now, to start us off, as I did mention, this is the second part in a series that began last week. So, Chabangu, maybe to just keep us back on track, kindly just share a quick recap of issues around land corruption and the accountability project in Africa and what it aims to achieve.
Okay, thank you very much. Transparency International Zimbabwe is, as you know, is part of a global movement that seeks to respond to issues of corruption. And for this particular project, our focus is on land, trying to enhance transparency and accountability in land administration broadly. And we are doing this particular project with other countries in South Africa, Kenya, Zambia, and Madagascar as well. So there are about 4 countries that are actually part of this particular global project. But of interest for us in Zimbabwe, we want to ensure that we understand that land administration is imbued in so many complex dynamics, and we are trying to unpack those complex issues. For example, who are the custodians of the land, whether it's state land, urban land, peri-urban land, and so forth. And we have seen that because of this ambiguity in terms of who owns the land, it has been an opportunity for people to either sell land illegally, correctly. In some instances, we have seen that land has been used for political expediency. So we are saying that we want to ensure that all the stakeholders come together, they discuss and map a way forward, either at a policy reform level, but also at a capacity building level, to ensure that everyone is aware on how land is administered, and necessary safeguards are actually put in place by the relevant authorities, the government, local authorities, etc., in terms of curbing any form of corruption that is existing in terms of land. And lastly, as you might be aware, that land in the African context plays a very, very pivotal role. I mean, that's where our ancestors are buried, and land is actually it has an enormous value for land. So we need to ensure that we transparently handle land, we administer it properly, and we ensure that we do not disenfranchise citizens in particular, and we do not disenfranchise the future generations, particularly on how we handle land. So basically, in short, that's what we are saying is as an institution, and that is the reason why we have been supporting these episodes in partnership with your institution, Capital, to ensure that we ensure that people are aware on how to get access to land, and also so that they're not also duped, and also to know where to report any form of corruption relating to land. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for laying that groundwork. And as you rightfully say, land is important, and the appetite for land has been very, very notable. And on that note, I want to come to you, Mr. Akili. In relation to this appetite by residents, by citizens for land, there's also been an increase in land-based corruption cases. Share with us some of the main issues, perhaps 3 issues that you can touch on that have been highlighted by residents when it comes to land administration.
Thank you so much. So from a resident perspective, what we have encountered, or our residents have encountered, it is change of reservation, where probably it's a park for recreation, but all of a sudden you just see people start to construct houses. And in most cases, you actually see that even though the law provides for consultation, advertisements, all those things, they would also even not happen. So again, you realize that from a resident perspective, the processes and the procedures of alienation of land, maybe probably which was being used for another purpose, and now being want to be used for another purpose, you actually see that those things they are shrouded in secrecy. It's very, very unfortunate. I'll give you one of the latest experience we have encountered. I think about on the 11th, if I'm not mistaken, 10th of January, the local authority, which is City of Harare, intends to regularize about 15 areas for housing stands, and these are areas which are already been built. I think this is provided, I think, in the Regional Town Planning Act, to regularize. But you actually see that when the residents went to Mbare, where it was written that if you have objections, you go to Mbare and you can be able to access documentation relating to that, so that you can scrutinize and everything. And when some residents went there, they did not find anything relating to that. And even some officials were also shocked that, we were looking for what, And these are some of the issues which then begins to point that they are underhand deals around land governance, that sometimes things are not done transparently, so that the ordinary citizens can participate in the decision making, but also being informed. That's number one. Number two, there's another issue which I think sanitized the corruption. When I was sitting there, I was thinking, when you hear the land baron, that's a corrupt person. But again, we have glorified this name, and these are the people who are connected to the people who are inside, and to some extent they then even hint that this area is going to be regularized. Go and invade, and the land barons invade, and then at the end of the day, the regularization process starts, and areas are regularized. And you could actually see that there is that connection between those who are outside and those who are inside, especially in local authorities. And this has been, happening for a longer time. And even we have also informed the local authority at some point in time. Even some, they come in form of land developers, but they will be not land developers, but these are the people who have an interest in the land, and they are also probably selling that land. Some of them, they come in form of cooperatives. And I remember, I think the Minister Kasukwere that time, who was the Minister of Local Government, he highlighted that we no longer need housing cooperatives. I know that had serious governance issues to say this is in the domain of Minister of SMEs and whatever. But the City of Harare then went to make a resolution to say they were no longer dealing with the chairpersons of housing cooperatives, because those were becoming conduits of corruption. And even some cooperatives, I'll give an example. Kwergakushinga in Mavuku started around 1985, and until now, Kwergakushinga is still there, and they still need more land. And that's the appetite for land, which I think everyone has been talking about. Competing interests. People still need more land. But again, you actually see that when the cooperative was registered, maybe probably it had 200 people who applied, but now there are more than 5 to 1,000. And these are some of the issues which then begin to come up to say, but they were allocated their portion. Why are you continuously allocating them. So you could actually see those are some of the things we begin to have more questions than answers in relation to land governance or to land appropriation within our urban local authority. These are just probably 3 areas which I've just highlighted, but there are more, to that effect. Yeah.
Indeed, and just taking it from there, Mr. Mshamba, these issues that are being raised by residents that Mr. Aki has put across, and I'm sure there are even more issues that are within your purview. It would seem that the entry points of corruption seem to be quite prevalent in local government. There have been public procurement deals that have, just demonstrated a poor land administration. What are your views around this? And what is the ministry's long-term vision and plan in dealing with closing off some of these entry points? Or do you accept, maybe first of all, that there is a syndicate and there are conduits coming out of these public offices themselves to begin with?
Thank you very much, Rumbi, for that quite lucid question. And thank you, colleagues, for the contributions made earlier with respect to our land management system. There is no ambiguity in terms of the law and the structures for land management in Zimbabwe. Essentially, all land belongs and is vested in the president. When the president decides that some land needs to be used for a particular use, and it's the first time that he is allocating that land to a particular use, he actually does that through what is called a deed of grant. Subsequently, those who have been given the deed of grant may subdivide land and then pass it on to others in the form of a title deed or a deed of transfer. You are now transferring, but the original is a deed of grant. We have different categories of land ownership which are recognized or vested in the presidency. We have land which is communal land, we have land which is farming land, and the president administers farmland through the minister responsible for lands and agriculture at present, and that's Honorable Masoko. We also have urban land, and that land, the president administers urban land through the minister responsible for local government and public works. At present, that's Honorable Winston Chitando. Essentially, we also have a category of land which may be found in communal land, which may be found in farming land, or which may be found in urban land, which is mining. And essentially, you register a mining claim on any piece of land where it's established that there are mineral resources underground, which, given the technology at the time, can be exploitable. There is also communal land, which is, as per constitution, at present is administered by rural district councils through traditional leaders. And the definition of traditional leaders recognizes the institution of chiefs, the institution of headmen who work under the chief, and a village development committee, which is chaired by the popularly known person as a sabuku, who are administering land in communal areas on behalf of a rural district council, which is doing so in terms of powers that are actually delegated to the rural district council from the office of the president. So essentially, the structures for land administration and land management do exist. What we have experienced in the country, essentially when we were then beginning to redress the colonial imbalances, there was a process of land reform, which became fast-tracked land reform. And in the process, we set aside certain ethos, traditions, respect for the rule of law, in order to facilitate access, quick access to farming land for purposes of improving production, enabling our people who were in communal lands to move on to farmland and so on and so forth. At some point in time when that process was coming to its close, people had realized the real value of land in terms of what it means. We used to run jingles across all media stations that the economy is land. Land is the economy. And this resonates with basic economics. Adam Smith identified 4 factors of production.
Mr. Mshamba, what role then has the ministry played in ensuring transparency and accountability in the land administration process in both rural and urban areas?
So let me speak with respect in particular to urban land, because the Ministry of Local Government, although traditional leaders as an institutions, as entities fall under local government, but the Communal Lands Act is at present administered by a sister ministry, which is the Ministry of Lands and Agriculture. So I will speak to urban land. With respect to urban land, the Minister of Local Government has gone on to, as of now, prepare what is called the Urban State Land Management Guide. This is a guide that essentially speaks to the role, defines the role of the ministry, who can gain access to land allocated by the ministry. The minister has actually identified and defined local authorities as land management authorities in trying actually to address some of the teething challenges that have been well explained by 2 colleagues. So that is in essence the structuring of what is happening right now. Who are land authorities? How does one access land from the urban land, that is, from the Ministry of Local Government? There exists within the ministry a whole department called the Urban State Land Office, USL, or Urban State Land Office. This is the office that receives applications, administers applications, gives or allocates land in accordance with the national growth development trajectories on the basis of applications that are submitted. Also makes recommendations on what land has to be passed on to local authorities as land management authorities. So principally at the state, in the ministry, we have this department that deals on a day-to-day basis with all the applications that arise. They have provincial structures, but predominantly the Harare office is the one that is most active and supervises all the provincial structures and receives those applications. This land may be applied for lease. The land may be applied for use in terms of at present lease with an option to outrightly purchase the land. Or you may actually apply for a piece of land for outright purchase. So you have those 3 categories of how land is accessed. Now, who accesses land? In terms of the Urban State Land Management Guide that has been put together, the ministry has established the teething issues that my colleagues have elaborated. The reason why we are sort of transforming and changing the structure and management of urban state land is essentially an acknowledgement that the state is too far removed from a piece of land in Victoria Falls, from a piece of land in Beit Bridge. How do we have oversight on it? So the ministry has now roped in local authorities as urban management, land management authorities, and they are given certain powers and responsibilities to administer, to plan for the land. You might be aware the president made a call to action that across all the entire country, he wants local authorities to have master plans. These master plans are essentially land use master plans, defining how much in a local authority is land for housing, which are the areas for future growth, how much should be going to industrial use, how much is residential, how much is reserved for recreational, and so on and so forth. And once those uses are defined in terms of quantities in hectares and percentages and so on and so forth, being defined and designated as such, and then putting rules and measures to say In the event that you have made an error, or maybe patterns of land use have changed, if you want
This is
to,
how you then go
this
about
is
it.
how you then go about it, which essentially is now your land management, where you are converting from one use to another use. And one use that is seriously suffered is land reserved for recreation or breathing spaces, green spaces. The events that are happening in Meborain are essentially speaking to land that has been designated as the lungs of the city, spaces where you have fresh air, spaces where you have water percolation, you have vegetation to improve the urban environment, the ambience. But those spaces were being abused. People were throwing litter in them, and people started to have issues with some of the so-called recreational spaces, in particular the non-active recreational spaces, where it's zoned recreation, but there are no recreational facilities developed thereon, and people started to abuse them. And others then began to look at the potential of this land and would identify it for various uses, would apply for it, and so on and so forth. Initially following the law. Ultimately, when demand did increase significantly, when
Then
the
there
demand,
were some shortcuts.
then you had those shortcuts happening. So essentially, the ministry is very much aware of those things that have been happening. The minister is fully aware. The permanent secretary is fully aware, and measures are being put in place to actually achieve the outcome that my colleagues in Transparency International Zimbabwe actually wish. But the institutional framework and the laws are there. It's essentially a process of ensuring we enforce, and together with other stakeholders, we actually have a regime that works to respect the laws governing land management and administration in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Mshamba, for that. It's encouraging to hear, and I think, Mr. Akila, I want to come straight to you there. Having heard that and the things that are within the scope of the ministry, and of course also even in keeping with the mandate and this program that Transparency International Zimbabwe is running, one key recommendation to the ministry on ensuring this transparency and accountability in land administration going forward.
I think from a leader's perspective, our observations is the provisions which are being manipulated, which are then found in the Regional Town Planning Act, which speaks to the issues of regularization. So land is invaded, and then people build structures, and again they pay a fine to the local authority, and then the structures are what? Are now legal. So
Suddenly legal.
yes, so that provision is open to manipulation. That provision fuels corruption, because as I said to you that some people were even informed to say, in some time you shall see that it becomes what? Land for what? For housing, and for sure. I've met people, sometimes we've gone like meeting people, tight combat demolitions. And this guy is telling me that, you know what, Nkoma, in Juga and Tututamba, but I have now two stands, one in Mauberain, one in, I'm forgetting the other place. And he said, through doing, I just build a cabin, and later when it's regularized, I move a good structure, sometimes sell it, and and these people we found them, I think, when they did a land wrangle with Billy Rottenberg in Marimba there, in Aspinall. So you actually see, so those are some of the things, structural, some things which are embedded within the law, that some of these things, they need to be addressed. That's number one. Number two, the issue around the Regional Town Planning Act versus the Environmental Management Act. I think Mr. Mshamba highlighted the issues around ambience, the issues, but also you remember Harare is built on the headwaters of Lake Chivera, or on the watershed of Lake Chivera. And some of the areas which had been left are wetlands, and they had been left for the purposes of ambience, for the purpose of even continue to give streams water,
And those breathing
exactly
spaces as well.
Yeah, but when you look at our local authorities, when they plan, they ignore the Environmental Management Act. So when you read the Environmental Management Act, there's a provision which says if there is conflict within the law, the Environmental Management Act is the supreme of all. But you realize local authorities, they love their pink book, the Regional Town Planning and Country Act, and they use that. And you actually, they ignore that. And I think recently the government came up with a gazette on wetlands, which which we felt that it was going to provide guidance into spatial planning, But again, when you look into how our local authorities operate, they ignore those things, So again, you would actually see that there is no cohesion within these laws. And this is where is it coming from now, to say, when such things happen, they open up room for corruption. Even the environmental impact assessment process. Let me just highlight to you one our worry, Mr. Mshamba and our colleague from TIZ, how corruption can happen. So the Environmental Management Act has got a provision of the environmental impact assessment. So for any development to happen, like those big structures and whatever, those things need to happen first, right? But the process, Rumbi, if you want to do the process, you are the developer, for an example. So you as the developer, you find your own consultant to do the environmental impact assessment.
Mm-hmm.
So the environmental the consultant, what does can he or she fail your project?
Because
exactly.
They have to do what I want.
Exactly, they sing to the tune of the piper. So those are some of the issues which are very, very clear. And I remember at some point, this developer, I'll mention an area, I think it was around in Kambuzuma, where even, the way the document was written, and when you look on the ground, things were totally different. So those are some of the things which you have realized, that these are some of the provisions which can be able to be manipulated, and at some point in time, promote corruption. In Mfakos, Mr. Mshamba, I went to Mfakos, this is a consortium between City of Harare and some people in Mfakos. And I contacted the environmental management agents and I asked, so why are you allowing people to construct on a wetland? And this guy, he's late now, he just shared with me the environmental impact assessment report. And it was showing that it's good to
go.
Exactly. But guess what? When you go on the ground, even a 1 meter shovel, water will start to gush out from because it's a wetland. But because some of these things are just done by people in the office, right? We do everything, our planners, Mr. Mshamba and everyone, we are just sitting on the table with the maps, but we don't go to the actual ground to be able to verify, to say, is this what is being represented on the map? Lastly, the master plan which Mr. Mshamba was talking about, whilst we appreciate that, but I can tell you that we are now planning the city which has been already planned by land barons. That's what that's.
So it's very reactive and not proactive.
Yeah.
Let me come in there and come to you, Chabangu, in terms of your closing recommendations. A key recommendation from Transparency International Zimbabwe on this issue of land administration in Zimbabwe.
I think from this brief discussion, we can see that there are a lot of issues are emerging, complex, and in some instances, we need maybe to ensure that the government departments, the CSOs, and the residents will come together and actually try to close the gaps on corruption. That's very important. I think for us, that's a very important starting point. And because if we are not careful, we will not even have Harare in the next 10, 15 years because of the way in which we are all of a sudden developing, amassing land and so forth. So we need to be more futuristic in our planning and ensure that we allow these platforms of engagement between the government and the citizens. So and try to come up with an ideal policy and plans and implement those policies that we have proposed. Thank you.
And coming to you last, Mr. Mshamba, you do hear a lot of the issues that fall squarely into your ministry's lap. What is the way forward in light of these issues and, of course, towards a more clear, accountable and transparent land management system in Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much for that question. His Excellency the President has a very simple and clear vision. And this vision essentially is dubbed the Vision 2030, and it's of an upper middle income society based on an upper income economy. And access to basic services, and we'll be living in smart cities. We have an urbanization strategy which essentially speaks to 71 plus urban centers. We have recognized the demand, the massive demand for planned land. The only way we can deal with the issue of the appetite for land is by ensuring that we provide planned land in the appropriate quantities across the country. The current challenge is that there is a lot of fixation on Harare City, whose boundaries will no longer expand, and hence the pressure on even the wetlands and so forth. But essentially, our Zimbabwean people respect property. Everybody wants to say ndine pangu pokugara pandinosira mhuri yangu. And through the 71 plus urbanization strategy, we are looking at the new city in Mount Hampden, providing quite significant amount of land for urban development. We have 15,500 hectares which are being planned for. We are right now at the local plan stage. We also have 60 district capitals that we are facilitating in each of the rural district councils. Besides the 60 district capitals, we have our 8 provincial capital cities. These are the capital cities where you find Gweru is one of those, Chinoi for Marsh West, and so on and so forth. Beyond, we are also talking about 120 growth centers. That is 2 growth centers in each of the districts where we are going to be providing planned land and resources permitting, ensuring that there is serviced land. So we are essentially moving towards, quietly by the way, without blowing the trumpet too much loudly, trying to make sure that we match the demand for planned land across the country. And we believe this is the more sustainable and permanent solution to trying to address this. That does not mean we are turning a blind eye on incidences of malpractice, malfeasance, people taking advantage of certain loopholes in the system and the like. We are quite aware of those, and we are letting the law take its course. We are also doing litigation within the ministry. We are strengthening our systems, processes and procedures around land procurement, land access. We are dealing with land barons in partnership with other state entities, including ZAC itself, the Zimbabwe Republic Police, and so on and so forth. You remember recently what happened in Gimboki in Mutare. Those people are now behind bars. What happened in Manyame RDC, Longlands, Dunota Farms, just across Manyame River. And we are seriously working with the law enforcement authorities to make sure that the land baronism phenomena is a thing of the past. And those who are accessing land illegally in some of the reserved areas within our urban centers, let them do whatever they are doing with the full knowledge that the long arm of the law will eventually reach to them.
And I think on that note, we bring our conversation to a close this evening. My guests were Chabangu Ngomani, Shingirai Mshamba, and Ruben Akili. And this was the second part of this series, proudly sponsored by Transparency International Zimbabwe, around improving transparency and accountability in the land administration process and processes.